Breaking news out of Ottawa, Canada has just imposed a complete halt on $540 billion in forestry product exports to the United States, and right now, as we speak, construction sites across America are shutting down. This isn't just about lumber prices going up. This is about the complete paralysis of the American construction industry, an industry that employs 7.6 million Americans and contributes $1.3 trillion to the U.S. economy every year. In the next 11 minutes, I'm going to break down exactly who triggered this economic nuclear option and why, what it means for every American planning to buy a home or renovate in the next 18 months, and the permanent structural damage this will cause to U.S.-Canada trade relations that have existed for over a century. Here's the question that should terrify everyone watching. When the world's most stable trading partnership implodes in under 72 hours, what does that say about the fragility of the entire global economic system? Let me paint you the picture. On January 23, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, citing national security concerns and trade imbalances that his administration claimed had cost American workers hundreds of thousands of jobs. The announcement came at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time from the Oval Office, with the president declaring that Canada had taken advantage of American generosity for too long. By January 24, 2025 at 2:15 p.m., Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held an emergency cabinet meeting in Ottawa. According to sources inside the Prime Minister's office who spoke to the Globe and Mail, the discussion was heated and consensus was immediate. Canada would not negotiate under threat. At 6:30 a.m. on January 25, 2025, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland announced Canada's response at a press conference in Parliament Hill. The Canadian government would immediately halt all forestry product exports to the United States until the tariffs were removed. This included softwood lumber, plywood, oriented strand board, wood pulp, and paper products. The Peterson Institute for International Economics released an emergency analysis within hours, stating that this represented the single largest disruption to North American trade since the implementation of NAFTA in 1994. By January 26, 2025, the impact was already cascading through the American economy. The National Association of Home Builders reported that lumber yards from Seattle to Miami were seeing their inventories evaporate. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta published a preliminary assessment warning that construction spending could contract by 38% within the first quarter if the standoff continued. So how exactly does this work? Think of it like this. Imagine your body needs blood to function, and suddenly someone cuts off 33% of your blood supply. That's what Canada just did to the American construction industry. Canada supplies 33% of all wood products used in American construction, but it's not distributed evenly. For softwood lumber, the kind used to frame houses, apartments, and commercial buildings, Canada supplies 47.5% of all U.S. consumption. The Yale Budget Lab released a detailed breakdown, showing that American lumber production peaked in 2006 and has never recovered. U.S. forests cannot physically produce enough lumber to meet domestic demand. The infrastructure doesn't exist. The mills were shut down decades ago. The workforce was retrained for other industries. Let me be crystal clear about what happens next. Step 1. Within 72 hours, lumber yards run out of Canadian inventory. Step 2. Builders who are mid-construction scramble to find alternative supplies. Step 3. American lumber mills attempt to increase production, but they're operating at 92% capacity already, according to the U.S. Forest Service. Step 4. Prices explode. The National Association of Home Builders calculates that for every $1,000 increase in lumber costs, an additional 163,000 American families are priced out of buying a new home. Step 5. Construction projects halt, not slow down, halt completely. Because here's what most people don't understand about construction. You can't build a house with 70% of the lumber you need. You can't frame walls that are missing critical supports. Projects either get completed or they sit abandoned. There's no middle ground. The data validates this cascade. During the COVID-19 lumber shortage in 2021, when prices spiked but supply was merely constrained, not eliminated, the American construction industry lost 476,000 jobs in 3 months, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That was with reduced supply. We're now looking at eliminated supply from a single source that accounts for 1/3 of the market. And it gets worse. Let me introduce you to Michael Patterson, a 52-year-old general contractor from Boise, Idaho, who has been building homes for 27 years. Michael runs a mid-sized construction firm that employs 38 people and completes between 40 and 55 residential projects annually. On January 24, 2025, Michael had 19 active construction sites at various stages of completion. 12 of those projects were framed but not yet roofed. They need an additional 270,000 board feet of lumber to complete. Michael's lumber supplier called him at 7:43 a.m. on January 26th and told him there would be no more deliveries. The Canadian mills had stopped shipping. The lumber yard had 3 days of inventory remaining. Michael did the math in under 2 minutes. With no Canadian lumber, he could finish exactly 2 of his 19 projects. The remaining 17 would sit exposed to weather, slowly degrading, while he paid $18,000 per week in financing costs, insurance, and site security. Michael made the impossible choice. He laid off 22 of his 38 employees on January 27, 2025. These weren't abstract numbers. These were people he'd worked with for years. Sarah Chen, his lead carpenter, had 3 kids and a mortgage. James Rodriguez, his site supervisor, was 6 months from retirement. Michael kept 16 employees and tried to finish the 2 completable projects while praying for a diplomatic resolution. But here's the devastating outcome. By February 3, 2025, Michael's financing bank called. The 17 unfinished projects were in violation of their construction loan terms. The bank classified them as non-performing assets. Michael's credit line was frozen. His company, built over nearly 3 decades, was effectively bankrupt. Multiply Michael Patterson's story by thousands of contractors across America who are facing identical mathematics. But here's the kicker. It's not just small contractors. Let me tell you about Jennifer Williams, a 39-year-old purchasing manager for Horizon Builders, one of the largest residential construction companies in the Southeast, operating across Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. Jennifer is responsible for sourcing materials for 312 active construction projects valued at $1.8 billion. Her job is to ensure that lumber, concrete, steel, and other materials arrive on schedule so that construction crews stay productive. Jennifer has maintained relationships with Canadian lumber suppliers for 14 years. On January 25, 2025 at 11:27 a.m., Jennifer received simultaneous emails from all 6 of her Canadian suppliers. All contracts were suspended indefinitely. All shipments were canceled. All deposits would be refunded. Jennifer spent the next 16 hours calling every lumber supplier in the United States. The conversation was identical at each company. They were already sold out for the next 90 days. They had waiting lists with hundreds of contractors ahead of her. Some quoted prices 400% higher than January 24th rates. Others simply said they couldn't help. Jennifer presented her findings to Horizon Builders' executive team on January 27th. The company made the decision to halt all new construction starts immediately. Projects already framed would be completed with existing inventory. Projects in foundation stage would be abandoned. The financial impact was catastrophic. Horizon Builders had pre-sold 147 homes to buyers who had put down deposits averaging $68,000. Those homes would not be built. The company faced a tidal wave of lawsuits, refunds, and reputational damage. Jennifer's division, which employed 234 people, was reduced to 48 employees by February 1, 2025. The devastating outcome extended beyond Horizon Builders. Those 147 families who had planned to move into new homes were now trapped in a nightmare of legal disputes, lost deposits, and shattered dreams of homeownership. And it gets worse. Meet Robert Chen, a 63-year-old retired engineer from Portland, Oregon, who spent 40 years working in aerospace manufacturing. Robert and his wife Margaret had been planning their retirement for 2 decades. They purchased a wooded 5-acre lot outside Portland in 2022 for $380,000. They spent 18 months working with an architect to design their dream retirement home. They broke ground on November 4, 2024. By January 25, 2025, the foundation was complete, and framing was scheduled to begin on February 2nd. Robert's contractor called him on January 26th at 4:15 p.m. The framing lumber from British Columbia wasn't coming. Alternative American lumber would cost an additional $197,000, a 43% increase in their construction budget. Robert and Margaret faced an impossible choice. They had already spent $412,000 on the lot, architectural fees, engineering, permits, and foundation work. They had sold their previous home in December 2024 to finance the construction. That money was committed. They were living in a rental apartment, paying $2,800 per month while waiting for their retirement home to be completed. They couldn't afford the additional $197,000. They didn't have it. Borrowing it would require taking on debt at 63 years old that they couldn't service with their fixed retirement income. The devastating outcome arrived on February 9, 2025. Robert and Margaret made the decision to abandon the project. They would try to sell the partially completed property at a massive loss. Their retirement dreams, their financial security, everything they had worked 40 years to build, destroyed in 2 weeks because of a trade dispute they had no control over. Multiply Robert and Margaret Chen's story by thousands of Americans who are watching their life savings evaporate in real time. According to the Brookings Institution, the construction industry shutdown will have a cascading economic impact that extends far beyond contractors and home buyers. Furniture manufacturers who supply new homes will see demand collapse. Appliance companies will cut production. Landscaping services will lose contracts. Mortgage lenders will see loan originations plummet. Experts warn that the ripple effects will eliminate an estimated 384,000 jobs across 23 different industries within the first 90 days. The National Bureau of Economic Research released a working paper on January 29, 2025, analyzing historical trade disruptions of similar magnitude. Their conclusion was stark. For every month this standoff continues, U.S. GDP will contract by 0.3%. A 6-month standoff would trigger a technical recession. The Harvard Kennedy School's Mossavar Rahmani Center for Business and Government published an assessment focusing on the political implications. Their analysis warned that construction workers and related trades are concentrated in swing states. Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all have construction employment rates above the national average. The political backlash from 384,000 lost jobs could reshape the 2026 midterm elections and the 2028 presidential race. The data shows that voters who lose their jobs due to trade policy are significantly more likely to vote against incumbent parties. But here's what really concerns analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations. This isn't just about lumber and construction. This is about the fundamental architecture of North American economic integration. Let me be crystal clear about what's happening beneath the surface. Canada and the United States have the world's largest bilateral trading relationship. Last year, that trade totaled $761 billion. Canadian goods cross into the United States through 327 ports of entry every single day. American factories depend on Canadian parts. Canadian hospitals use American equipment. The supply chains are so integrated that it's impossible to fully separate them without causing catastrophic economic damage on both sides. The forestry shutdown is a warning shot. Canada is demonstrating that it has economic weapons that can inflict massive pain on the United States with minimal cost to itself. Why? Because Canada exports 33% of U.S. lumber consumption, but lumber represents only 4.1% of Canadian exports. Canada can absorb this pain. The United States cannot. Over the next 30 to 90 days, we'll see the immediate construction industry collapse I've already described. Prices will spike. Projects will halt. Hundreds of thousands of workers will be laid off. Over 6 to 12 months, if this standoff continues, we'll see secondary economic effects. The housing shortage in America will become catastrophic. Homelessness will increase. Rental prices will surge as demand for existing housing intensifies. First-time home buyers will be permanently priced out of the market. Young families will delay having children because they can't afford appropriate housing. The American dream of home ownership will become even more distant for millions of working-class families. But here's what really concerns analysts at the International Monetary Fund: the permanent damage to U.S.-Canada relations. For 157 years, since the Treaty of Washington in 1871, the United States and Canada have maintained the most peaceful and prosperous border in world history. That relationship survived 2 world wars, the Cold War, NAFTA negotiations, and countless political transitions. It was built on trust, mutual economic dependence, and the understanding that cooperation benefited both nations more than confrontation. This trade war is destroying that trust at a molecular level. Canadian politicians are openly discussing long-term economic diversification away from American markets. Canadian businesses are exploring European and Asian partnerships to reduce dependence on U.S. consumers. Canadian public opinion, historically friendly toward America, has turned sharply negative. A poll conducted by Angus Reid on January 28, 2025, showed that 73% of Canadians support their government's hard line against American tariffs, even if it causes short-term economic pain. This matters because economic relationships, once broken, take decades to rebuild. The European Union and United Kingdom spent 6 years negotiating Brexit and are still dealing with the economic fallout. The United States and China have been in trade disputes since 2018, and the relationship has only deteriorated. Once you break integrated supply chains, once you force businesses to find alternative suppliers, once you create political hostility between populations, you can't simply reverse it with a new trade agreement. The structural damage is permanent. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, there's another dimension that most analysis is missing: the signal this sends to America's other trading partners. Mexico supplies 14% of U.S. agricultural imports. If Mexico sees Canada successfully using trade as a weapon against American tariffs, what stops them from doing the same? Japan supplies crucial automotive parts and electronics. South Korea provides semiconductors and displays. Vietnam manufactures clothing and consumer goods. Every single one of these countries is watching how this Canada standoff plays out. If Canada wins concessions by cutting off forestry products, every American trading partner now knows they have leverage. The era of American trade dominance, where the U.S. could impose terms because other countries needed access to American consumers more than America needed their products, is over. The balance of power has shifted, and it gets worse. The Atlantic Council released an analysis on February 1, 2025, focusing on the national security implications. Modern militaries require secure supply chains for critical materials. The United States military uses Canadian lumber for base construction, temporary structures in deployment zones, and emergency infrastructure. If the U.S. can't rely on Canadian lumber for civilian construction, can it rely on Canada for military logistics in a crisis? The answer, according to retired Admiral James Stavridis, is unclear. This trade war is forcing American military planners to reconsider assumptions about Allied cooperation that have been foundational since the Second World War. Let's recap the 3 critical points. First, who pays for this trade war? Not politicians in Washington or Ottawa. Not billionaires with diversified investment portfolios. The people who pay are Michael Patterson, the Idaho contractor who built his business over 27 years and watched it collapse in 2 weeks. Jennifer Williams, the purchasing manager who had to lay off 186 people. Robert and Margaret Chen, the retired couple who lost their life savings and their retirement dreams. The construction workers, the lumberyard employees, the suppliers, the small business owners, the families who were 6 months away from moving into new homes. They're the ones paying the price with their jobs, their financial security, and their futures. Second, the scale is staggering. $540 billion in annual trade has stopped. 7.6 million Americans work in construction, and 384,000 of them will lose their jobs in the next 90 days if this continues. The housing shortage will intensify. Prices will surge. An entire generation of young Americans will be permanently locked out of home ownership. The economic damage from a 6-month standoff could exceed $200 billion in lost GDP. third, the permanent consequence that nobody is talking about. The most stable, prosperous, mutually beneficial trading relationship in modern history has been shattered in 72 hours. Once you break that trust, once you force businesses to diversify their supply chains away from traditional partners, once you create political hostility between populations, you cannot simply reverse it. The structural damage is permanent. America's other trading partners are watching. They're learning that they have leverage. The era of unquestioned American economic dominance is ending in real time. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The next video will break down what happens if this standoff extends beyond 90 days and why that scenario is becoming more likely every day that passes. Drop a comment below telling me how this trade war is affecting your community. Are you seeing construction projects halt in your area? Share this video with anyone who's planning to buy a home or renovate in the next year. They need to understand what's coming. Here's what keeps me up at night. We're watching a trade dispute that started with political posturing transform into an economic catastrophe that will reshape millions of American lives. The people making these decisions in Washington and Ottawa won't suffer the consequences. They'll move on to the next crisis, the next news cycle, the next political calculation. But Michael Patterson will still be bankrupt. Jennifer Williams will still be unemployed. Robert and Margaret Chen will still be living in a rental apartment at 63 years old, watching their retirement dreams fade. And the thousands of families who were weeks away from moving into new homes will still be searching for answers that nobody in power can give them. That's the human cost of trade wars that politicians never mention when they're imposing tariffs and threatening retaliation. Real people with real lives and real dreams are the ones left picking up the pieces when geopolitical chess games go wrong.